Welcome, folks. I can see we're starting to have some people join us for the webinar today. We will be getting started in just a few moments. We want to give everyone a chance to log in. You'll notice that the chat is disabled, but you do have access to the Q&A function so that you can ask questions throughout the presentation. And we are currently recording, and we'll record the presentation throughout. And it will be made available after the presentation concludes. So you can find it. We'll be posting it up on our YouTube channel. And it is, this is set up as an on-demand webinar. So if you registered for the webinar, you will have access to the recording as soon as it's available. All right. It's good. I actually don't see a lot of familiar names in the participants list today. So we got some new faces to our program. I'm excited to talk to you all. We still have a couple minutes before we plan to get started. You are here for Mangrove Considerations. My name is Alyssa Vinson, and I'm the residential horticulture agent at the Manatee County Extension Office. Again, if you're just joining us, I have disabled the chat function, but Q&A is available for you to ask questions throughout the presentation, and we will be recording this, and the recording will be available. Let me give folks a few more minutes. We're still 2 minutes from noon, so we'll get started then. I see a hand raised in the participant box. If you have a question, go ahead and type it into the Q&A. Otherwise, if you were just saying hello, hello. All right, just about another minute. I'm going to make sure everybody gets a chance to log in. All right, well, my clock says noon, so we're gonna go ahead and get started just to make sure that we have enough time to address any questions that you might have following the presentation. If you're just joining us in the last couple of minutes, the chat function is disabled, but you can ask questions in the Q&A. You should see a little icon with a couple of bubbles that says Q&A, and you can type your questions in there, and that'll kind of hold them till the end, and I can go ahead and answer them at that point. I just want to say welcome to everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about mangroves. My name is Alyssa Vinson, and I am the residential horticulture agent at the Manatee County Extension Office here in Manatee County, Florida. We're located in Palmetto, right next to the county fairgrounds, if you're not familiar with where our office is. And if you're kind of new to extension programming, welcome. We are a function of the University of Florida, part of the land grant university system. And our mission is to take the research that's conducted at the University of Florida, as well as at educational institutions throughout the world, and kind of distill it and make it relevant and applicable for folks in our communities. And so, you know, our end goal is really to enhance your quality of life by providing you with research-based information. And so my role at Extension, in part, is to manage our Florida-friendly landscaping program, our Master Gardener volunteer program, as well as do all kinds of educational outreach related to landscapes, landscape ecology, trees, community landscaping, things like that. We have commercial horticulture agents that work specifically with our landscape professionals. We folks who work specifically on marine resources and commercial fisheries. We have folks who work with the family and nutrition program, so focusing more on kind of health and wellness for families in our community. We really span a wide array of topics here at Extension, and we are happy to help and to answer any questions and to work with folks in the community to offer different kinds of programs. So if you didn't know who we were before, please reach out to us and get to know us a little better, because we're here to help you. So with that, I am going to go ahead and get started on our presentation today. And I want to talk about mangroves because here in Manatee County we live, we're a coastal community. And so we received pretty frequently questions here in the office regarding, you know, what can I do with my mangrove shoreline? What are the rules related to them? I know there are rules, but I'm not quite sure what they are. And just generally, you know, what are these things growing in the water? So today we're going to start out just by talking about what a mangrove is. And mangroves, as you can see by this map, are kind of centered along the equatorial line. They like the subtropical climate that's associated with that portion of the world. And so Florida is one of the only places in the United States, and indeed, you know, Florida and Mexico are sort of the only sections of North America that contain mangroves. But they're very common throughout South America, Africa, Southeast Asia, even you know, into Australia. So they're a pretty common sort of set of species that are found throughout the world. And when I say a set of species, it's because mangroves actually don't refer to a particular plant. So we could have, you know, if you're talking about like an oak tree belongs to the family Quercus. So it's going to be, you know, Quercus alba, Quercus virginiana, that's going to refer to an oak tree. Mangroves aren't like that. Mangrove is a term that's used to describe a set of characteristics that plants have. And so you'll see that we talk about sort of these similar characteristics of these species that allow them to live in these very harsh environments. So here in Florida, what that looks like is we have species that are identified as mangroves in state law, and then we have species that are kind of commonly associated with mangroves that can live in similar environments. And you know, so the picture here is one of our very common species of mangrove that we have in Florida, and that's our red mangrove, Rhizophora mangala. And it's really easily identifiable by its prop roots. We'll talk a little bit more about ID in a minute though. But so they can look like that. They can be in the water, but these are also mangroves. So mangroves can look just kind of like an upland tree, or they can be like the picture on the right, which is a black mangrove, where they're kind of in that in-between space. They're not out in the standing water, but they're not all the way up on kind of dry land as well. Sometimes in areas that are not Florida, you might see something like this on the left-hand side. And I'm not sure if you can see really easily what that is. You can actually go ahead, if somebody wants to type into the Q&A, what are these brown things in this picture on the left-hand side? Go ahead and type it into the Q&A. Somebody raised a hand. Nobody's brave? Okay. So those brown lumps you see in the water are actually camels. And in some portions of the world, they are grazed on mangroves. And so sometimes mangroves can be fodder for herds of camels. Not here in Florida, right? We don't have herds of camels that are grazing on our mangroves in Florida. But something that you may not know is that mangroves are trees, and they are actually tall trees if we let them get that tall. The picture that you see on the right-hand side is of the champion mangrove tree in the United States, and it is located in Lee County, Florida, and it is 64 feet tall. And the trunk has a diameter of 67 inches. This is a massive, massive red mangrove. And again, this is just in Lee County. So here in Florida, we do get mangroves that get exceedingly tall. It's pretty common in other parts of the world for them to get that tall as well. But we're not used to seeing them that way. We're used to seeing them along a seawall, trimmed into a nice little hedge. So when I mentioned that mangroves are not a certain species, right? They're something that shares common characteristics among species. And so that's going to be, some of those characteristics are their distribution throughout the world. So it's about 8% of the world's coastlines are actually mangrove coastlines. They like estuarian environments, which means you're not going to find them in kind of high energy dune systems. Like for us, you wouldn't find them right out on the Gulf of Mexico. You're going to find them in areas where your salt and your fresh systems are mixing and mingling. And you're going to find them in areas where the water energy is a little bit lower. So not really high wave, high energy environments, but kind of, if you think in our part of Florida, we have a lot of keys. So think like Anna Maria Island. You have the Gulf side of Anna Maria Island, and then you have the intercoastal bay side, right? And that's where you're going to find the mangroves, is in those kind of lower energy, the back keys closer to those freshwater inputs. So they do have special adaptations on their bodies that allow them to be salt tolerant. Some of the mangroves exclude salt, so they're going to have the ability to close off the tissues of their, of their roots, of their trunk, and exclude salt from getting into their tissues. And some of them are salt extruders, so they actually have the ability to kind of push the salts out of their bodies. They also are what's called viviparous, which is a really neat adaptation that allows them to be very prolific and successful with germination, with new mangrove trees that are able to grow. And what vivipary means is it allows the seed to begin the germination process while it's still attached to the parent plant. So when you see kind of these red mangrove trees dripping with propagules, those propagules will already have started the germination process, so that once they fall from the parent tree, they have a much higher success rate when they eventually find a spot to root in. So these are some of those common characteristics that mangrove species share worldwide. And here, in particular in Florida, All three of our regulated mangrove species, so those that are identified and codified in state law as mangroves, they are all going to have an opposite leaf arrangement. And so what that means is that if you're looking at the stem of the mangrove, the leaves are going to be directly across from each other, arranged around that stem. And this is important because we have a common mangrove associate, which is the buttonwood, that has an alternate leaf arrangement, which means that when you look at the way the leaves are positioned on the stem, they're going to go at various angles and not directly across from each other. So how do we identify mangroves if they are just plants that share common characteristics? Well, for us, we're going to focus on those mangrove trees that are here in Florida that are specifically recognized by law as mangroves. And so the first one is our red mangrove. And the red mangrove is the one that you're going to see out in the water. It has these reddish brown prop roots that kind of hold it up out of the water. They're commonly called the walking trees because of their horizontal growth habit. They will actually drop down these prop roots, these adventitious roots from branches and spread horizontally through the water. They have these very highly recognizable propagules for their seeds. So they're the pencil-like propagules with a brownish red tip on one end and a green tip on the other. They tend to have a very bright green, very glossy leaf, and they can get very large. They're nice and elliptic, you know, the underside of the leaf is going to have almost like a yellowy green kind of color. These are a very, very vibrant green leaf on the red mangrove. White mangroves are going to be found more commonly in the uplands, not necessarily in standing water. And they are generally not going to have any visible root structure above the soil or substrate. And the reason I say generally is because I have seen white mangroves with pneumatophores or with roots above the soil, but it's usually in areas where the white mangroves are intermixed very heavily with black mangroves, and that soil is being inundated very frequently. Generally, your white mangroves are going to be further away from that area of inundation, and they're not going to have any visible roots. They do have a very distinctive leaf shape, however, which is a very rounded leaf. They're going to feel almost succulent. They're a very kind of a nice fat leaf, nice fat and succulent leaf, and they're most often going to have a little notch in the tip. So they're a very rounded leaf with a little notch in the tip. And that's how you can identify those white mangroves. They will also, if you're looking at the leaf, they will have two little bumps on the petiole, which is the little stem that attaches the leaf to the big stem. They're going to have two little bumps there that are called nectaries, and they do just that. They exude some sugary substances. Their seeds look like little teardrops. So you can see this picture here. It has what the seeds look like. They're the smallest of the three species as far as their seeds are concerned. They kind of grow in these clusters, and you'll see them on the ground. They look like little teardrops. Black mangroves, the ones that I'm showing here in this further right photo, they are going to have visible roots as well that are called pneumatophores, and they look like fingers coming up out of the soil. They're going to have a really dark and furrowed bark on them, and the leaf on the black mangrove is the most beautiful, I consider, of the three, because it has this almost blue-green, silvery kind of sheen to it, and they're a little bit fuzzy, especially on the underside. And so they also will get kind of encrusted with salt as the day goes on. So in the morning, you might see them and they might have, you know, some water on the leaves, but then if you find them kind of in the hot afternoon, a lot of times the black mangrove leaves will be encrusted with salt and sparkling and just beautiful. So again, black mangroves have pneumatophores that come up out of the soil that look like fingers. Red mangroves have visible roots as well, but those are the red prop roots that go down into the water. Those are adventitious roots. And then white mangroves typically have no visible roots. And then the other one that I put here is the buttonwood. It's not considered a mangrove according to the law in Florida. You can see they have these kind of leathery wedge-shaped leaves, and their seeds are these little clusters of button-like structures. And again, they're going to have an alternate leaf arrangement as compared to our three other species, or three mangrove species, which are an opposite leaf arrangement. And again, the chat function has been turned off, but if you have any questions as we go throughout, please don't hesitate to type your questions into the Q&A and I'll get to them as I can. So one of the things that's really interesting about mangroves is that they are kind of the culmination and the basis for the ecosystem in which they live. So they have all of these leaves that they drop and detritus that they catch in their roots. And the breakdown of this detritus in this salty, oxygen-deprived environment is really the basis for the larger food web in which they exist. So you have all of these halophytic bacteria, salt-loving bacteria that are living in the soil, that are breaking down all of this detritus that the mangroves capture. And then as that detritus is broken down, it becomes available to other organisms to consume it, which then become fodder for crustaceans and bivalves, which become fodder for small fish, which become fodder for large fish and birds, et cetera, et cetera. And so they really do kind of act as not just a habitat structure, you know, a place for birds to roost, a place for fish to live among the roots, a place for sponges and bivalves to attach to the roots. They also provide the very basis for the food web that they support. And so this kind of just highlights the ecosystem, and this is going to be common throughout the world where you find mangrove ecosystems. They're going to have this similar kind of structure where you start really with that detritus, and as it breaks down, it feeds this larger chain of organisms. So you may be asking at this point, what does ecology have to do with my landscape, right? Why are you talking to me about ecosystems? I want to know, you know, about the mangroves that are growing on my shoreline. Well, I think it's really important for us to structure our conversations about landscape with an understanding of the species that we're talking about, and also the kind of the land surface in which we occupy. So what has happened, what is happening to our current land surface is going to change the decisions that we make about our landscape. And so I want to take a little bit of time to just point out how our landscape changes affect ecosystems so that you can understand kind of where we're coming from with